Hey guys, Todd Anderson here with another Magic Online video for your entertainment purposes. Today we got a little something special for you. We're going to be playing Legacy Infect, and we got a little bit of a different version today. We're not going to be playing Tom Ross's same old, same old. Today we're going to be trying out a version featuring Jace the Mind Sculptor. So, for those of you who have not played a ton of older formats, Jace the Mind Sculptor is banned in Modern and was banned in 4-year Extended, but is basically just one of the most powerful Planeswalkers ever printed. His zero ability of Brainstorm is incredibly powerful with ways to shuffle your deck, and when it was in Standard, it was ridiculously strong with Squadron Hawk, just various ways to manipulate your deck. But all of his other abilities are pretty good too. Back when Zendikar and World Wake were being printed, blue was thought of as one of the better sets or better colors for a long time. And so for the previous few sets to World Wake, they made blue, underpowered for a few, I guess, like a year and some change. And when Jace the Mind Sculptor came out, they're like, alright, we need to give blue a little bit of breathing room, and we're going to print something really powerful that people can use, and he's going to be the marquee for blue cards for some time to come. And he made some waves, I'm not going to lie. He was eventually banned in Standard along with Stoneforge Mystic. He defined an entire Standard format, and he's been a powerhouse in Legacy and even Vintage for quite some time. So since Infect is a deck that really loves its brainstorms, we have so many cards that are situational counterspells. We have a lot of ways to just combo kill our opponents out of nowhere, and Brainstorm helps a lot with that. So I assume that having access to some number of Jace the Mind Sculptors fuels that even more. The fact that you can bounce some creatures with it while building your board is also pretty sweet, and the fact that we already are playing Noble Hierarch to kind of accelerate while also being able to pump our things like Glistener Elf, Blooded Agent, and Inkmoth Nexus. I think having Jace the Mind Sculptor is kind of a free roll. Now, this version is a bit radical. We don't have a lot of the quote-unquote normal cards for Infect. We're not playing Crop Rotation. That was a concession to play Jace the Mind Sculptor and a few more blue cards for Force of Will. Excuse me for 1 second. But playing more blue cards for Force of Will is a good thing. Force of Will is one of the cards that kind of holds Legacy together. I think that while it's not particularly awesome in this deck, it does give us a way to interact with our opponents in the early turns, and we have a way to force through Jace the Mind Sculptor as early as turn 3 and really gain back that card advantage that Force of Will would generally make us lose. Now, we don't have a lot of ways to naturally protect Jace the Mind Sculptor. We're not playing Tarmogoyf. We're not playing things like Shardless Agent, Baleful Strix, etc. We do have a couple of different ways where we can actually block to keep it around for a little while longer than normal, but for the most part, Jace the Mind Sculptor is just going to come down and brainstorm like once or twice and then probably die, or it's going to brainstorm once or twice and then we're going to kill our opponent. The fact that it can be used to bounce opposing creatures that would be in the way of Glistener Elf is kind of just icing on the cake. Now, most of these combo-based Legacy decks that have a lot of mana acceleration, I think more of them honestly should be playing Jace the Mind Sculptor. I played Jace in Sneak and Show for a while, and it was particularly powerful there because in the matchups where your opponent wasn't really attacking you much, it was a must counter. You play Jace the Mind Sculptor, you either bounce their random creature. It was great in the Sneak and Show mirrors. It lets you dig for a lot of combo pieces while also shuffling away dead cards with your fetch lands. And all in all, it was just an all-star. That deck had a bunch of 2-mana lands with Ancient Tomb and City of Traders, while also having Lotus Petal, and you could cast it as early as turn 2, and on the play, that's just a back-breaking effect. But it acted as like another bait card that your opponent kind of had to interact with, or else they were just going to lose, and I think it will have a similar effect in this deck. Now, the rest of the deck, for those of you who are not familiar with Infect, Glistener Elf and Blighted Agent and Inkmoth Nexus are our 3 cards that can deal our opponent infect damage. Now, the way this deck works in general is we play an infect creature such as Glistener Elf, Blighted Agent, or Inkmoth Nexus, and then we use the rest of our deck to pump it and hopefully kill our opponent. Invigorate is the best card to help do that, since it is effectively free. We're not trying to deal our opponent damage, so getting them 3 life is not a big deal. We're able to pump our infect creature +4/+4 for 0 mana, and then once we do that, we can either play a second one and give it, +8/+8, hopefully dealing them 10 in one shot with like a Glistener Elf and a Noble Hierarch with the Exalted trigger. But Invigorate combined with Berserk is insanely powerful because it gives us 10 damage on the spot without any other help. And against other combo decks, that's just a really fast kill. Against decks with a lot of blockers for the Glistener Elf, or even Delver of Seekers to block, the Trample from Berserk is particularly good. Now, since Berserk doesn't pump too much by itself, that's why we're only playing 2 copies, and for a while now I've considered going up to 3, but I keep coming back to 2, and I'm pretty happy with it. The new card that we're playing from the Khans block format, we're just playing Become Immense as a very cheap pump spell that is particularly strong in mostly because it pumps for an amount that is not exactly normal. If we, for example, have 2 Noble Hierarchs and a Glistener Elf or a Blighted Agent, that attacks for 3, and let's say we've already hit them for 1, it's just a very strange amount that, it's really difficult for your opponent to play around, but at the same time, it kind of just kills them out of nowhere every now and then. It's like a 1-card version of Invigorate plus Berserk if your opponent has at least 3 poison, because then it's going to allow the Become Immense plus the 1 power from your guy to just insta-kill them. Now, if you have a Pendlehaven and a Glistener Elf, the first time you attack, it'll be for 2. The second time you attack with the Become Immense, it'll be 8, and that'll just kill them in 2 swings. It doesn't always happen like that. Become Immense isn't always the best card because it doesn't give them trample, and sometimes they can kill your guy in response, but that's just kind of how Infect plays out. A lot of times you have to make yourself vulnerable for a turn to try to kill them before they can draw out of it. We also have 3 copies of Vines of the Vastwood to either give our creature virtual hexproof, or we can kick it to give it +4/+4. But this card is pretty mana intensive, especially if we want to give it +4/+4. But I think being a 1 green counterspell is pretty good in some matchups, so that's why we're playing 3 still. Most older versions played 4, but that was before we added Become Immense to the deck, which I think 1 Become Immense is better than the 4th Vines of the Vastwood, but I still like having access to a reasonable number of Vines of the Vastwood to help out against Abrupt Decay and things like that. Against other mid-range and combo decks we have, or not mid-range, against things like Counterbalance, other combo decks, and other spell-heavy decks, we have 2 copies of Spell Pierce, 3 copies of Daze, and then the 4 Force of Wills to help push our spells through. As far as card manipulation is concerned, to help us find our combo pieces, we have 2 copies of Preordain, 1 copy of Ponder. I like to mix this up a little bit. The reason why we have more Preordains than Ponders is because this deck likes to play non-fetch lands pretty regularly. Either Pendlehaven or Inkmoth Nexus will be your land play a lot of times after you cast a Brainstorm, because let's say you cast a Brainstorm and you don't have an Infect creature in play yet. Instead of being able to play a fetch land and shuffle those bad cards away, we're kind of forced to play Inkmoth Nexus as a threat, but sometimes we'll even still have an extra blue source in play, and after that we're able to play Preordain, put those 2 cards on the bottom, and go on with our merry lives, and not be forced to draw either of those bad cards. That is one of the main reasons why we're playing Preordain. Ponder is also okay in that situation because we're able to shuffle away all 3 cards. But I think in general Preordain, since we are trying to play lands that aren't fetch lands, is reasonable, because sometimes if there's 2 cards on top, one you don't like, one you do like, you can put one on top, one on bottom, and you're never going to draw that one. Whereas with Ponder, if you have 1 card that you desperately need but it's a little risky, let's say your opponent might have a removal spell and you're banking on them not having it, with Ponder you're still stuck with those 2 bad cards even if you kept the good one to try to kill them. So I like mixing it up. Ponder sees an extra card, but Preordain has a lot of different spots where it has more utility in this deck, since we only have 9 ways to shuffle our deck. And the main thing missing, which I forgot to talk about, I apologize. We have no crop rotations in this version. Older versions that me and Tom Ross and even Brad Nelson played at various tournaments were playing 2 crop rotations main deck. We had 1 copy of Wasteland, and in the sideboard we had Bojuka Bog and Karakas, and that gave us a little bit more flexibility against decks like Reanimator, Sneak and Show, etc. But those decks haven't really been showing up as of late. So in order to make the deck a little more consistent main deck to help out against Delver decks, as well as giving us just a little more range against things like Miracles and other mid-range and control decks, that's why I want to try out the Jace. Now, Jace is not going to be great against Delver. They have a lot of Stifles, Wastelands, even like Hymn to Torax in the bug versions, and things like that. It's going to be kind of difficult to hit 4 mana for this guy, but in the games that go super long and your opponent has a lot of removal, Jace is going to shine. And I could be wrong. He could be pretty bad in this deck, and we're going to see eventually, and hopefully I'm right instead of wrong. This is the first event that I've played Jace the Mind Sculptor in with Infect, and we're going to see just how good he is. But first, the sideboard, we have 2 copies of Blue Elemental Blast, which help out against the card Sneak and Show, the card Blood Moon, and all these mono red decks that keep popping up, especially on Magic Online. 3rd Spell Pierce to help out against combo spell heavy decks and Counterbalance. 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage, which act as our anti-graveyard card, but have a lot of splash damage against elves, since it shuts down Natural Order and Green Sun Zenith. 1 copy of Pith and Needle, because it's one of the most versatile cards in Legacy, shutting down anything from Sensei's Dividing Top all the way to Grindstone, and it just has a lot of value against things like Ether Vial. There's a ton of different cards in Legacy that you need to interact with, and Pith and Needle gives you a very wide range of ways to interact with your opponent based on what kind of deck they're playing, and it almost always has value against fringe decks where normal sideboard cards wouldn't really interact with. We also have 1 copy of Sylvan Library against the control decks that just can draw us a bunch of cards. I guess it's kind of like a cheaper version of Jace the Mind Sculptor against Miracles and the like, but I want to try the Jace's main deck. The 4 life per card matters a lot sometimes, as well as just Jace being blue against, for Force of Will against decks where we need to cast Force of Will more often. Now, there are some versions that have tried Sylvan Library in the main deck. I don't dislike them, but I don't love them. Our life is a valuable resource against a lot of these Delver-based decks, and Sylvan Library, you're going to cast it early, and you're not really going to want to pay 4 life against decks that are pressuring your life total. Whereas Jace the Mind Sculptor, you can just pitch to Force of Will, where a Sylvan Library can't be. Or if your opponent has used a lot of their spells to kill your creatures, the Jace comes down and immediately starts drawing you cards without using any of your life. So that's pretty important there. And then for Disenchants, we have 2 Corrosion Grips and 1 Seal of Primordium. I like to mix it up. That way our opponent can't lock us out with things like Counterbalance. And also Seal of Primordium can come down before your opponent resolves the Blood Moon. And that can be a way for you to kill that without influencing the rest of your future turns. But also Seal of Primordium, it can't be Thought Seized. It can't be, counterspelled later in the game when you're trying to kill a very specific artifact or enchantment. So I do like it in that you can go ahead and put it into play, get it out of your hand, and then use it at your own will. You're not really sitting back and waiting for your opponent to do something. Whereas if you have something like Nature's Claim, it could be incredibly vulnerable to a number of cards. Chalice of the Void, Counterbalance with Sensei's Divining Top, or just a one drop on top of their deck. A number of other things like Dispel, just various counter spells. When your opponent's tapped out and you can resolve a Seal of Primordium, it's usually good to go ahead and do so if it's going to be useful in that matchup. The rest of the sideboard, we have 3 Leyline of Sanctity, which I've played 1 before, and I've never really gone gung-ho, but the more I play Legacy in the past couple months, the more I want spells that can interact with Storm on a proactive level. And in a lot of decks, that means playing things like Meddling Mage, Aethersworn Canonist, creatures that can come into play and really threaten your opponent without having to sit back on a counterspell. Leyline of Sanctity allows us to do that, but does not mess up our game plan. You know, things like Metal Mage are pretty hard to cast. They're creatures that can die to Pyroclasm or, you know, Massacre from the Burning Wish versions of Storm. But for the most part, you know, these creatures attack for damage, and we don't really even need that. So instead, we're using this free roll Leyline of Sanctity that hopefully we find in our opening hand that will shut off about half of our opponent's deck. But the greatest part about Leyline of Sanctity in a deck like Infect is that we don't actually need to mulligan to a Leyline in a lot of our opening hands. If our opening hand contains, you know, like a turn 3 combo kill with a Force Will backup, that's generally good enough against Storm. But if we randomly open a hand with Leyline of Sanctity, it doesn't actually matter what the other 6 cards are. Leyline of Sanctity sometimes just blanks your opponent's entire game plan for game 2. They might have some answers after that, like Nature's Claim and such, maybe Echoing Truth, or something like that to bounce your Leyline of Sanctity, but if you have it in game 2, a lot of times your opponent's not going to expect it, and it's just going to win the game on its own. I think the card is great because it also has splash damage against things like Burn. It's okay against decks with Hymn to Torok and a ton of discard. Even Liliana of the Veil, they can still tick up to make you discard cards, but they're not going to be able to make you sacrifice creatures or activate its ultimate ability. Last but not least, we have 2 copies of Submerge, which are great against the Mirror Match, any sort of, I guess, Tarmogoyf deck, but they're also pretty solid against Elves. Now, the Mirror is not hugely played on Magic Online, and so I've been considering cutting these and changing them to Gutshot, and Gutshot is a reasonable replacement for the Mirror because it can kill something for free, similar to Submerge, but Gutshot is also really good against the white weenie decks that play Aether Vial, I guess Death and Taxes, and you know, it's free against them, but it kills things like Thalia, Mother of Runes, and the like, and you know, it can come in matchups where Submerge can't necessarily do anything. So we're having Submerge for now just because that's what I'm used to playing. I haven't had too much trouble with Death and Taxes with Infect lately, but if it gets more popular, it might be worth having more sideboard cards for that matchup just because it shows up enough. Sometimes you will lose to their better draws, and there's not a ton you can do about it, so having more ways to interact with them is definitely a plus. Alright guys, well, the daily should start in just a minute. Let's go ahead and, I guess, you just scroll down to the match, but I'll be right back.